Thank you so much. I can't see a thing, there we go. I know you're out there. Thank you so much. So my name is Kitty Colbert, and I'm the co-founder of the Athena Film Festival. In my previous life, I did a lot of reproductive rights work, which is one of the reasons why I'm moderating this panel. And I want to introduce our guests, who are two people who have extraordinary experience and have a whole lot to say on this issue. So on my right, this way, is Andrea Miller, who is the president and CEO of the National Institute for Reproductive Health and its Action Fund, which is an organization that has really worked hard, particularly in the States, to change public policy in this area. And Andrea has served, in a variety of different capacities for a couple of decades, including time with me at both the Center for Reproductive Rights, which we co-founded, and the ACLU. And on my left is Anna Marie Benitez, I get that right, who's the Senior Director of Government Relations at the National Latina Institute for Reproductive Health. And she's responsible there for their Washington, D.C. office, so I assume the federal policy and probably a lot of state policy as well. And has also had decades of experience working in politics around these issues. So I want to welcome both of you. And I wanted to start by asking you both, and we're going to come out to questions for the audience as well, but I wanted to start by saying, how accurate was this film? Did it portray what women go through? Andrea, you want to start?
Sure. I would say thank you. And first of all, thank you to the Athena Film Festival, and I'm just thrilled to be here and to have the ability to sponsor this film. I think it is, without a doubt, the most accurate portrayal of the experience of someone in her situation. I mean, Pennsylvania, the way they portrayed it, you might be sitting there thinking, was it true when she was looking at what the laws might be? Was it true that she would have had to go through, that she couldn't have insurance coverage? She would have had to have her parents' consent. She would have had to go to a court if she couldn't get her parents' consent. Was it true that it would have been a 2-day procedure? Is it true that people travel across state lines? The answers to all of those things is every step of the way that she went through that is absolutely yes. And I know Anne Marie will get into this, but you think about the fact that this is a 17-year-old white woman in rural Pennsylvania. Now layer onto that, if you weren't a white woman, so there's so many other elements of it, but in terms of every step of the process, the fact that she went to a crisis pregnancy center first, that they lied to her about how far along she was. Why? Because they wanted to delay her so that she wouldn't be able to get an abortion. Every step of the way. It was so clear and it was so real, how she was treated at the clinic. Every piece of that is what women go through every day.
Yeah, is this on? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi, hello everybody. So I was impressed with it really did think of all the elements that an individual would have to go through, particularly somebody of that age in a rural area in terms of accessing abortion. And our organization right now, the way we describe it is it's currently just a theory. Mm-hmm. Really, so many people in our communities have so many limited access, and this is just a sliver of that portrayal. When you add in also somebody's immigration status to that, so like for example, in Texas, all of these, actually, they have a lot of similar laws. But also, there's checkpoints within Texas, for example. So for you to get to it, and there's, the checkpoints are 100 miles in the country. So, y'all think it's like on the border, but it's not. It's actually in. So some people have to actually cross a checkpoint. And in the Rio Grande Valley, there's really just one clinic where you can access that care. So you have to, if you have status that you can actually cross a checkpoint, if you have transportation. Actually, what I would also like to say is a lot of what young people have to go through is also very similar to what undocumented individuals go through, because they don't have licenses, because they don't have IDs. The checkpoint is what is the additional component to that. And then for many individuals, also language is a huge barrier. I was intrigued at how the security guard asked for the ID, and I really wanted to see that. That's what I wanted to see, what they had in their hand, what they were giving, because that is actually a limited, that does impede access to care oftentimes.
So we've talked about the limited ability of access, and clearly it's gotten worse in recent years. But most people would, who are following the U.S. Supreme Court since the appointment of both Justice Kavanaugh and with his latest appointment, are expecting that court to make things even more difficult, giving states greater latitude to restrict abortion and to make it more difficult to obtain. I wanted to get your sense about what we're likely to see as a result of that, particularly around access issues.
For people who may not know, there's a case that's being argued in the Supreme Court out of Louisiana. It's being argued actually next week. And that is related to one of many of the types of restrictions that our opposition has put in place. Actually, since Roe versus Wade, there have been more than 1,200 laws against abortion that have been passed at the state level. And this in particular is aimed at closing clinics, and closing clinics specifically in Louisiana, which only has 3 clinics left. The court, I think, will take this as an opportunity, because it is a court that is now more conservative than it has been really ever at this point, I would venture to guess, since Roe versus Wade, to at the very least create a greater ability of states to sort of eliminate the floor, meaning the Supreme Court decides how low you can go or how low you can't go if you're the state or federal government in putting barriers in place for women and trying to close clinics and trying to penalize healthcare providers who provide this service. So my guess is they won't come out and say, we're hereby overturn Roe versus Wade, because they know how unpopular that would be. They know that that is absolutely not what a vast majority want in this country, and they know it's an election year. But what they probably will do is find some really creative way to further gut the legality, which will open the door for more states to do more kinds of laws, like all of the things that you saw her have to navigate. That's what's happening in Pennsylvania is very similar to what's already in place in at least half the states in this country. On the bright side, though, I will say, states don't only do bad things. We saw actually an enormous uptick in proactive legislation in this last year. We expect more states will do that. New York was a huge victory. We now have 13 states that have enshrined protections through state legislation. So whatever happens in the court, there are those states that have already put protections in place that are trying to remove the barriers. And just today, Virginia went from being a state that had a huge number of restrictions in place almost 10 years ago to removing most of those restrictions through legislation that'll be signed probably next week. So there are glimmers of hope. Stay tuned for more of those. That's what my organization works on, is moving those things forward. But I think you're going to see ultimately greater disparity across the states in terms of which direction they're going to go, and that's going to have even greater disparate impact on those who have least access to care, fewest resources, immigration status, age, all of the things that compound those challenges.
Anna Marie?
Yeah, and I would just add, this was so the decision that's going to be heard next Wednesday. The oral arguments will be next Wednesday. Decision will be later this year. A decision on the specific question that they're going to be addressing was already heard with Whole Women's Health in Texas. So one of the things that they like to do is make it difficult, not only by like adding 24-hour waiting period, ultrasounds, but what we'll be facing is admitting privileges, what Andrea was talking about, trap laws. So under the guise of let's make this procedure safer, let's make it so that we're protecting women, all doctors need to have these admitting privileges before they can provide abortions, which is just honestly another tactic to make it much more difficult to find a provider to be able to offer abortions. So that is what's currently happening in the court. It was a decision the Supreme Court already made a decision on, but just 2 years ago, and they're willing to look at this case again. So that's very concerning for us, particularly because it was in Texas, the original case, and a good chunk of when we, National Latina Institute for Reproductive Health, right, obviously we're focusing on the 29 million Latinas here in the United States, of which a good population is California, Texas, and Florida. So this is going to have a huge negative impact, not only in the Latino community, but anybody who's low income or underinsured and has very limited access to health care overall.
So one of the things that was interesting to me about the film, because obviously I come from Pennsylvania, I know is that these kids lived in Northumberland County, which is just north of Allentown. And ironically, there's an abortion clinic in Allentown. There are a number of clinics in Philadelphia, which is only 2 hours south. But the information that the kids had, and those clinics would have helped them get a court order to have an abortion without their parents' consent or notification. But the information they had was very limited because, of course, it was. And so I'm interested what both of you think about it at a time when we see increasing restrictions, and some states may even go to having no providers at all. How are we as a country going to enable those kids to get, and low-income women and everybody else who's having difficulty, get the information and the assistance they need to go? Because we remember the days before Roe, there were thousands of women coming into New York to get abortions. That will probably still be true. What can we do there?
I'm trying to think of where to start with that. So we have a very active base, and we do a good job. We do a lot of what our focus is, organizing our communities to educate our communities about what is going on and where they have access and where they can get care. Because when we start telling people, did you know that since Roe, 1,200 laws have been enacted at the state level? People get surprised, and then when you list it down for them what is actually happening in the state, then people want to actually act and do something. So we do a lot of that level of education, and we also have promotoras who are part of our networks, which are community health workers, and they also do a lot of sex education in that way. But that's just a glimmer of how we're organizing and a glimmer of how we're educating the community. We still have a lot more work to do, and I think with more and more of these restrictions, it is causing people to want to plug in and know what's going on, which is why we are seeing a surge at the state level of access to reproductive health care and protecting access.
I would just add to that there is a real understanding that we're going to have, and we're seeing these things already. There are new sites and services that are coming up online to be able to provide people with really direct information, as well as services that are coming into place to help with the transportation and the practical support and sort of all of that connective tissue that's going to be needed even more going forward. And that's a part of what sort of the whole movement is working on. What are those pieces to make sure that people know where they can go, be able to have the transportation, be able to have a place to stay. And you saw something in the film here, which is true. New York City, where they were, there are services, there are organizations, volunteer-run organizations, where if you have to come and stay multiple days for a procedure, you stay in someone's home overnight. There are volunteers who do that. There are abortion funds here in New York. We've helped make sure that even New York City Council now is providing funding to pay directly for abortions for people who come to this city or are from the city and can't afford it because they don't have insurance or because of their documentation status, whatever it might be. So there's already that sort of connective tissue being developed because we know people are going to have to travel. They already do. We know people don't have access. They already don't. And the information and relay service is going to have to be even more robust.
So let's go on out to the audience for questions. It's very hard for us to see, so right there in the, right past that first row, past the barrier.
Could you talk about how telemedicine is going to impact
Yeah.
this for women who might be in a state where there are bans, because we saw so many proposed bans last year? And also, outside of that, is there an infrastructure being set up for in those states where where everything is really at risk?
So we can tag team on this one too, probably.
Yeah.
So telemedicine is actually a great possibility. We know from the data that you can absolutely provide, particularly medication abortion, via telemedicine. The challenge is that many, many states have already been putting in place bans on the use of telemedicine, specifically in the context of abortion. So again, that's a place where the policy versus the medicine are at odds. But we also have new systems that are in place to inform women and to even have the information and back and forth relay with people who are trained. The fact is that medication abortion, if you have the right pills, if you have the right information, if you have someone to call to ask questions, women can self-manage their own abortions using medication abortion pills. It's tightly regulated right now, overly regulated. You can't even distribute it through a pharmacy. That is pure politics, has nothing to do with the medicine. So the medicine's good. The challenge with the politics is it's illegal. It's illegal to distribute it. It's illegal to take it on your own. So you made, in fact, it used to be the pre-Roe days. People thought it was the coat hanger. That was the image. Now it could be you might be able to get the pills. You might be able to self-manage your own abortion safely, but you may end up in jail. Pennsylvania, there was a woman who was prosecuted for ordering pills online for her daughter. In New York, there's a woman who's prosecuted for distributing the pills via the internet. So, again, those systems are coming up, but there's the increased criminalization of abortion care is an additional barrier that we're going to have to deal with. So people are already risking jail time.
Mm-hmm. And I would just, oh gosh, I lost my train of thought. But this is medication that's coming on its 20th anniversary, 20 years. So this is purely politics is what we're talking about. Also, if you look under the World Health Organization, they also have very clear guidelines of how you can use medication abortions. So it's safe around the world. It's been around for 20 years, yet there is ridiculous regulations that just are pure politics. It's not driven by science whatsoever. And it would, if we would be able to make advances on it, which we are working on, it would not only help people in rural areas. 59% of people who seek abortions are moms, right? Thinking of trying to get the time off, trying to find the transportation, trying to drive. If you even have insurance, if you can even call a doctor. So telemedicine actually would be an amazing path to increase access for abortion.
Okay, so we have time for 2 questions. Are there any other questions out there? Okay, right here in front.
Would you say, is there any state in the U.S. that you're satisfied with the, kind of level of services that they provide with respect to abortions, or is even in the most are there even the really progressive states, is there still stuff that you would want to see implemented?
I mean, there are definitely some good states that are doing even better things, but there's always work to be done. I mean, we know here in New York that there are barriers to care, that there are parts of the state that are underserved, that there are people who are uninsured, don't have resources, don't have access. Every state, every community has more work to be done because there's disproportionate access and people who are not able to get care. We know that is true even in the Californias, even in the New Yorks, but they are also making progress. So it isn't all doom and gloom.
Right. So recently, California just passed a law where you can get self-medication abortion on campuses. Yep. So there are states that have model legislation, so there is progress. There is much more progress to be made. Guttmacher, which one of the young people were researching up on during the movie, actually has this beautiful table. Well, I think, because it's helpful for me, has a table of all the states and what has passed in each state in terms of restrictions, so you can see how far along states are.
And I would say just my hopeful note for you is last year we had 9 states pass 15 proactive affirmative abortion laws. That is the most we've ever had in a single year in this nation's history. So it's not all doom and gloom. 6 bans, 15 good laws.
Right. So I want to, so any other questions? So let me end with a question about the politics of this. Currently, there are 23 states that what I think of are trifectas. That is, the governorships, the House and the Senate in a bicameral legislature are controlled by Republicans. So there are 23 states with trifecta Republican control, another 18 or so states with trifecta Democratic control, and the rest in between. What can people who care about this issue do? I'm going to put in a plug for Pennsylvania. That is, we want to turn Pennsylvania blue. We're working very hard to do that. There's 9 House seats we need to flip, 4 Senate seats we need to flip. So there's a real possibility in 2020 if all goes well. But add to that, what else can people do, particularly people who are in New York and in essentially a safe state, to help people in other states?
Well, first I'd say don't forget about New York, because you have a lot of state senators who are feeling a lot of heat for taking the right votes this past year. So don't forget about New York. But the other things you can do is that if you look at that map that Kitty just laid out, the reality is that each of those states, there are programs in place to be able to do call-ins, to be able to do text to people to encourage them to vote, to be able, there are lots of organizations that are out there, even both in those states and at the national level. You can plug right into those things. You can plug into those things through the party apparatus. That's the beauty of the technology we have today, is you can actually make a difference in Arizona, in Pennsylvania. I mean, you can get on a bus and go to Pennsylvania. I actually encourage you to get on buses and go to Pennsylvania and knock doors as we get closer. But you can absolutely connect in, look for those states that are trending the right direction, the Arizonas, the Pennsylvanias. Michigan and Wisconsin and Kansas recently got governors who are good, who are now becoming blocks to their legislatures passing bad laws. So there's a lot of progress that we're seeing there, and I really encourage people to plug into those efforts, and every state has a whole multiplicity of organizations that are going to say, yes, come here, we'll give you the text numbers, we'll give you the phone numbers, write the postcards. There's some great opportunities to plug in.
Mm-hmm. I guess I would just reinforce what you just said, which is get out the vote, get out the vote, get out the vote, get out the vote. And then the other thing I would say is, when folks do vote the right way, I can't tell you how significant it is to say thank you. Because right now, there is trepidation. Can we say the word abortion? Even though there's polls that show we are in the majority time and time again. I can't even, if you just quickly look it up, you'll see. The polls are on our site on this. There's still trepidation for some reason to talk about this topic. So anytime a legislator votes the right way, please say thank you and tell other people to tell them thank you. That will really go a long way, because this is something that we all need to talk about, and lots of people need to see this movie to see how difficult it really is in today's age here in the United States to have access to abortion.
Terrific. One more reminder, we have films beginning at noon tomorrow, all day tomorrow night, all day Sunday, again beginning at noon. We urge you to get your tickets and join us for lots of great movies. Thanks so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Good. Thank you.
Hard to